welcome back to the Building Your Brand podcast. Now, one of the things that I pride myself on most in my business is how consistent I am with this podcast. And for the last, I think, nearly 6 months, I have been releasing 2 episodes a week, with there being a solo episode on a Friday. And I'm not going to lie, this episode very nearly did not happen, but I managed to get it done and I've managed to stick with my very consistent streak. Now, today I want to chat to you a bit about public speaking. So earlier this week, I did a talk at an event in London called Founder Mums. I was doing a talk all about the rejection challenge and inspiring people in the room that rejection could be the best thing that could happen to their business. The last couple of years have been really exciting for me in terms of public speaking. So I spoke at Adobe MAX London last year and also Adobe MAX LA. And then this year I've had a really nice sort of steady flow of speaking gigs come in. So at the start of the year, I spoke at an event at St. Bride's Library in London. I also was on a panel in Cardiff about podcasting. I hosted my own event, so I was interviewing. Then I've done this Founder Mums talk, and then I have a couple more talks coming up. So I'm doing one in Hamburg actually at a big marketing conference, which looks amazing. So I'm going to be speaking at that. And then I'm also speaking at Atomicon, which I am so excited about. And that got announced the other day. But what I wanted to chat about today is kind of how I prepare my talks and how I put them together. Now, I should caveat all of this by saying I did do some work a couple of years ago and then a little bit last year with Charlotte Lewis, who is a brilliant public speaking coach. So if you are looking for any sort of support with public speaking, putting talks together, I would massively recommend getting in touch with her. I actually recorded a podcast episode with her for this podcast, so you can go back and listen to that to hear her tips and wisdom as well. But yeah, some of the things that I'm gonna share in this episode are born out of conversations that I had with her, and I guess me working out how I like to do things and her almost giving me permission to do them the way that feels good to me. So people do things differently. So as I kind of talk you through my process, I am absolutely not saying that you have to do it like this, but maybe hearing me talk about it will help you work out how you think you might like to work if you want to get into public speaking a bit more. So the first thing is some people like to write a script of their talk and learn it word for word. And I've got friends who will write the script of the talk. Some of them will then record themselves reading it out, and then they will listen to it over and over again until they've learned it word for word. Now, the reason I don't think this works for me is that then if I go wrong and I mess up a word or a sentence or anything in the talk, because I've like learned it word for word, I think it would really throw me, and then I would find it really hard to sort of carry on my flow if something's gone wrong. So I do not learn my talks word for word, which in some senses means that actually preparing the talk is a lot easier. And I know then that I have certain points in the talk that I need to hit, and I kind of like know, the general things that I want to say, but the actual wording of them flows quite naturally, and I just do it at the time. I guess what this does result in, there's some pros and cons to this. Well, not really cons, but like one of the cons is that there is a chance that I might forget to say something. Now, it's not a massive con in the sense that usually the audience will be completely unaware of that because they don't know what I was planning to say. And I make sure that all of the key sections are really clearly mapped out in my mind. So it's more like it might just be a little small thing that I forgot to say that I was thinking that I would insert. But one of the massive pros for me is that I can slightly adjust the talk based on the atmosphere in the room, the audience there, what the vibe is. And this is something that I've been thinking about a bit more recently. So at this event I spoke at earlier in the week, my talk was right at the very end of the day. I could tell people were tired. And so I adjusted the energy that I showed up with. So when maybe if it had been earlier in the day, I would have gone for like a slower, steadier pace. I actually sped things up and kept it very high energy and very fast paced because people, yeah, did seem to be flagging a bit. And I think they needed a bit of a boost. So I was able to kind of read the room and adjust, not so much the content, although I did have to cut some bits out because we were running out of time, but it was more, I adjusted like the energy I showed up with. So that was interesting. And I think that is only really possible, not only possible, but is made easier by the fact that I haven't learned my talk word for word. So what I tend to do is when I've kind of worked out the topic of the talk, and sometimes this will be, in fact, pretty much always this is in like conversation with whoever it is that is hosting the event or running the event. Usually the sort of topic, the synopsis and the title get approved, and then it'll be a case of starting to work on the talk. And I generally, and I work, it's interesting, this, I work like this with my design projects as well. I genuinely have to have this like idea, creative idea in my head, and I have to kind of like let it sit there and percolate for a little while. So what I find is that, I'll just be going about my life and I'll just be like thinking of ideas, things will come to me, like I might jot them down so that I don't forget. I might be in the shower and I'll suddenly have like a really great idea of how I want to start the talk, my kind of like hook for the whole talk. Or like the points that I want to make will come to me and I'll sort of jot those down. And then I'll basically come up with a structure for the talk. And it's very much, I guess, like following like a classic storytelling arc. So usually there'll be something thought-provoking and some sort of struggle at the start, or I guess like setting the scene of the story. So then you'll have like the conflict and the struggle, then you'll have over how I overcame it, and then you'll have the sort of end of the talk, which is, like the inspiration and the like positive message that I want to leave people with. Now, obviously, it's not always like that. Sometimes the talks that I give are a bit more like technical, maybe they're about branding or maybe they're about podcasting, and it's much more sort of practical and educational. And so with those, I mean, I try to still have the story arc in there because I think that really helps people to remember the content, but it might be a little bit less dramatic story and a bit more like practical tips. And then I like to make sure that I've chunked up my talk. I'm not sure if that's the technical term, chunked up, but I like to break down my talk into sections. And this will vary depending on the length of the talk and the topic that I'm talking about. But it's usually, you'll have your sort of intro, your opening statement. Then I probably have like another section where it's kind of like setting the scene. Then I'll usually have, I mean, like in an ideal world, I would have 3 clear points because I think having chatted to Charlotte and just from my own experience, like 3 key things is a really nice amount for people to remember. Like they might actually remember a lot of the content of the talk if it's just in 3. Like I have done it in more. Sometimes I've done like 5 lessons. So again, it completely depends what the topic is. But then so maybe I'll have my 3 sections and then like a bit of a conclusion and then my kind of like final wrap up of the talk. And so I basically plot it out like that. And honestly, because I'm not writing the script for the talk, that actually makes process of putting the talk together quite quick. So once I've had all the ideas of the things that I want to say, I might like jot down those sections and maybe, just make some notes of kind of like what I want to come under each section and then take it from there. And then what I tend to do is start putting my slides together. Sometimes I'll do this like very roughly and I'll just, even just put the titles in or just a statement or a phrase or a word on the slide. So I won't design or anything. I'll just like lay out what I imagine the slides to be like or what I imagine is going to go on them. And then I'll probably do a bit of a run through of the talk with the slides, in that kind of basic format. And then I can kind of like move things around. I can change things slightly, delete things, add things. And then I will sort of flesh them out. I mean, sometimes I just go straight in and design them exactly how I want them. Sometimes I'm a bit clearer on what needs to go on the slides than other times. I am definitely like a less is more when it comes to my slides. So it'll tend to be a short statement or an image. I'm not putting large amounts of text that I'm going to read off the slide, because again, the temptation then is too great to just look at the slide and read what it says. And I don't think that makes for a very dynamic talk. So it will just be like a visual to, enhance what I'm saying, or it'll be, if it's 3 key points, it will be the point, the key point, the lesson. It might be, like a statement that I want people to remember at the end. So yeah, I keep my slides pretty minimal. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not saying that there's particularly a right and a wrong way of doing it. I'm just sort of sharing how I do it. And then once I've got, everything in place, so my structure, my slides, I will then practice the talk. And I used to give myself a really hard time because I felt like I hadn't prepped enough if I hadn't run through the talk from start to finish a particular number of times. But one of the things that Charlotte really helped me with, and I think this is one of those kind of having permission things that I mentioned, she pointed out that I didn't need to always just practice the talk from start to finish. Because of the way that I'd created the structure, I could actually practice chunks of the talk, in little pieces. So the way that might look is I'm in the car going to pick my kids up from somewhere, and I'm like, oh, I'll just run through the intro and I'll just practice that section. Or it might be that I'm walking down the street and I will, practice points 1 and 2, or depending on how long I've got. Or maybe I'll be doing some errands, or I'll just be at home pottering and I'll practice the conclusion. I actually like do it in the shower quite a lot. So obviously my showers aren't long enough to do a whole 30-minute talk, so I'll just practice a section in the shower. So if people, I kind of like joke that if you see me walking down the street talking to myself, it's probably that I am practicing a section of a talk. But what this has made me realize is that I don't have to do the full talk start to finish to get really well rehearsed in it. I can break it up into those sections. Now, obviously, I am going to want to do it from start to finish quite a few times, but it doesn't always have to be practiced that way. And that actually just really helped me to practice far more than I would have done normally, because I gave myself, or Charlotte gave me permission to do it in these like very, little sections just as I'm going about my life. And I know Charlotte does this too, and she practices in the car. She'll practice when she's out and about. One of the other things is that I tend to make my slides in Adobe Express, which has an app. And so basically I can just go in, find my slides, and if I'm, I don't know, out and about and I just want to run through a section, I can actually get my slides up and, actually run through those while I'm talking as well. I mean, I don't do that all the time, but one of the key things that I feel like I definitely need to practice is getting the cadence right of, like when I need to hit the clicker, when I need to move on to the right slide, or the next slide, I should say, because often I get carried away talking and then I just completely forget about my slides. So yeah, so those are kind of like some of the ways that I prepare for a talk. And I am not saying I am the perfect public speaker, far from it, but I do feel like I've had lots of opportunities to practice over the last couple of years, which has been amazing, and I've been really enjoying it. I do find that it takes a lot out of me energetically and just time-wise, because it is a lot of work to put a talk together and practice it and work on the delivery So, I do have to factor that in when I sort of almost like plan out my year and decide whether to say yes to things because yeah, it's quite an intense process. One of the other bits of advice that Charlotte gave me, which I always take on board now, is I never open my talk with an introduction to myself, not straight away anyway. So I tend to open my talk with a bit of a hook. So a question, maybe a quite strong statement, and then once I've sort of got into the talk, if it's necessarily, it isn't always necessary, but if I feel like it's necessary, then I will do a very brief introduction to who I am. So I think a lot of people go straight in with the introduction, and I don't always think that's the most interesting way to start a talk. I think the other thing is thinking about how you're going to end it. I think you want to leave the audience with a key message that you want them to go away with. And I think, as with branding, where you are thinking about your target audience and who you're talking to and how you want to attract them and draw them in, I think with public speaking, again, like you really need to think about your audience as you're preparing your talk. So who are they? What are their problems? What is going to interest them? What is going to help them? And I think that will really help you as you think about how you start your talk, how you end your talk, how you keep people engaged all the way through. And I think you've got to think of it almost like a user experience problem. Like what is the experience going to be like for the audience listening to this talk? Are you going to keep them engaged? How are you going to make what you're saying to them memorable so they don't just forget it straight after the talk? How are you going to encourage them to take action from the talk? And again, this all depends on what the event is, who you're talking to, like what the goal of the session is. So yeah, lots of things to think about. If you've done much public speaking, I would love to hear your process too. Is it similar to mine? Is it different? How do you prepare your talks? And I hope you found this interesting.